What's going on, YouTube? This is Boxingwave, and we are back with another fight breakdown. Later on this evening, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, all right, on ESPN. All right, no pay-per-view, thank God, because we've been getting so many pay-per-views lately. But Vasyl Lomachenko is going to be making his return, all right, to face George Kambosos, and this is going to be for a vacant IBF strap. Okay, this is one of the titles that Devin Haney used to hold while he was undisputed champion at 135. We know that he's moved up and the belts pretty much got separated. And it's a really important fight. It's a must win for both fighters, and I'll explain shortly why. But it should be a good fight. Vasyl Lomachenko, 36 years old now, and he's 17 wins, 3 losses, 11 knockouts. All right. And George Kambosos, I believe he's going to be 31 soon. 21 wins, 10 knockouts, and 2 losses to the same fighter, Devin Haney. How did we get here? Vasyl Lomachenko, he was there in the beginning when the belts got unified. At one point, he moved up to 135. He became unified. He had 3 titles at one point, beating Luke Campbell, and then going to the Teofimo Lopez fight, which was disputable, undisputed, because 4 belts was on the line, or 4 major titles were on the line. But one of the titles, I believe the WBC title, I think Devin Haney had, I think Lomachenko had a franchise title, and Devin Haney was the mandatory. It was this whole big mess. And Teofimo Lopez won the fight. All right, he had all 4 major titles, but he wasn't really being recognized as undisputed at the time. Okay, then Teofimo loses to George Kambosos in a huge upset, and George went on to fight Devin Haney for undisputed with both titles, both WBC, the regular and the franchise title, and Devin Haney won both fights. All right, and then Devin Haney beat Lomachenko while defending the undisputed titles, and he moved up. And this is where we're at. Loma has not had a fight since the loss of Devin Haney a year ago. Okay. George Kambosos had a fight recently against Maxie Hughes, a southpaw. We'll get more into that shortly, but he had a recent fight. And that's how we got here. These guys are trying to get back in line with winning a title, and I say it's a must win because there's a lot of questions with these two. Vasyl Lomachenko, obviously, with age, does he still have it? Can he still get an opportunity to go for undisputed? It's going to really be tough because even if he is to win this fight, and he is a heavy favorite to win, the schedule doesn't really get easier. You have a lot of fresh, new, younger guys at 135. And this is a problem where you get older, especially when you're super athletic like the way he is. You got to start relying more on your skill set alone and not just solely athleticism. We know that he's been one of the most athletic fighters that we've seen and ever. And now that he's getting older, and he's fighting at a bigger division, it gets a little tougher. And then you have George, who still has a lot to prove, in my opinion. Because he beat Teofimo Lopez, and that was a huge win, right? A major, major win. Major upset win. But outside of that fight, he hasn't really looked that impressive. Before going to that fight, he was a huge underdog because, if you've seen his fights prior to that, Lee Selby, solid fighter, Mickey Bay, solid fighter. They were solid wins, but it's not like he dominated. He didn't look elite. You can have a debate on whether or not he was world level at that point. All right, but he was a mandatory for Teofimo Lopez's title, and I personally believe that Teofimo Lopez fought the worst fight that anyone can fight. He totally didn't respect his opponent. He didn't have good coaching in his corner. He didn't look like he prepared for a 12-round fight. Not only that, but he was dealing with health issues, marital issues, and all of these things outside. Plus, he's having these issues with the promoter. Was he going to fight on Triller or Top Rank? It was just a big mess. So the fight was rescheduled a bunch of times, and by the time we got it, we got what we got. And Tio lost. Not to take anything away from George, because it was a great win, and that's what happens when you sleep on your opponent. Your opponent comes in at his best, you came in at your worst, and he paid for it. And I'm talking about Teofimo Lopez. But I gotta give George credit, because the options was Lomachenko or Devin Haney, or even Tank Davis. He had won 4 titles, and because of the war in Ukraine, Lomachenko was unavailable. All right, Lomachenko was probably going to be the first option, and it didn't happen. And he decided to fight Devin Haney for the official undisputed match. And I got to give him credit. I know he got the A side pickings and got the majority of the purse, and I believe he did also for the rematch after losing the first fight. But I have to give him credit for taking the fight, because he could have just did what everybody else is doing, which is basically saying, oh, the fight is not worth it, this guy hasn't fought. And he could have went that route. He gave Devin the opportunity. Devin won, and he became undisputed. All right. But he has a lot to prove, because outside of that Teofimo win, there's not much there, And then in his most recent fight against Maxie Hughes, most people that seen that fight will tell you that Maxie Hughes won the fight. Most people. And I thought it was pretty clear for me. I thought Maxie clearly won. I don't think it was a domination or anything, but George, for the first time in 9 years, fought a southpaw. And it looked like he didn't have the experience and lacked the experience in that fight. Maxie, a good boxer, not a big puncher, but a good boxer, just seemed to be better that night against George. And George, one thing about him and his style, he is a pretty good counterpuncher. He does have quick hands. He is tough. He is durable. He has a lot of heart. But there are flaws there. There are flaws, and we saw him, and it seemed like Maxie was able to outbox him with ease at points in the fight, countering him. The timing was on point, catching George as he was coming in. George became very aggressive in the fight. He had to be, because he was getting outboxed. He was getting out-timed. Maxie was catching him on the way in and catching him on the way out. And when it comes to southpaw fighting orthodox fighters, the lead foot domination, thing could be a big thing. And it just seemed like Maxie, keeping his foot on the outside at times, had a clearer shot on the inside, used the jab. George, not much of a jab, used the jab a lot to get in, just couldn't really land clean throughout the fight. I believe he got outboxed. And now you're fighting an even more advanced southpaw, a guy even at his age, 36 years old. Lomachenko is still a very good pressure fighter, especially in the second half of his fights. Even in his losses, Salido, Teofimo, Devin Haney, you can make an argument that he won the second half of those fights. Those are his strongest points in those fights, in those later rounds. The fight really begins with Loma in the second half. Now, not so much earlier in his career, even though he would take a round or two early, and he would start off faster back then. Back when he was fighting the Anthony Crollas, the Gary Russells, Nicola Walters, those guys. But now he's older, and, he has to fight in spurts, and I think that's the biggest disadvantage now. And I think that is the reason why fighters that, to me, George would not be able to compete with a prime Lomachenko, or even a Lomachenko that just got to 135. Being that he's slowing down, fighting in spurts, a little not as explosive as he was. I think that's what gives George the advantage here. Plus, they're fighting out in Australia, and you're fighting in your hometown. It's going to be a big crowd. That could be a factor. It may not be. All right, but these are certain things that could, you know, sway the judges and the outcome of the fight overall. To me, Vasyl Lomachenko is still the better fighter. I don't need to drag it. Vasyl Lomachenko is still the better fighter to me, and he had a better performance against Devin Haney. He fought him last year, like I said. George fought him twice and two times in 2022. And, I'm not a triangle theory type of guy or anything like that, and I don't base everything off common opponents. But to me, Vasyl Lomachenko, it was a close fight with Devin, whereas George losing to Devin was pretty clear. And looking at the Maxie Hughes fight, looking at the Devin Haney fights, it just seems to me like Loma is still far in advance. All right. Yes, Tiafimo did terrible against George, because that's a common opponent as well. But I also think that Tiafimo looked way better against Lomachenko. Strategically, he looked better. And that's why I'm not basing it off that performance, Lomachenko, part of the reason why I'm leaning still strongly on Loma, and when we got these fights, I try to go for the arguments of the underdog, really, and I try to look for those things to see, like, okay, how can I make some money out of this? Because Loma is a heavy favorite. But when I look at it and I look at the way Maxie Hughes was able to time him with ease, how he was able to turn and step around George, even the footwork was superior to George. And then I think of Lomachenko, who has some of the greatest legs that we've seen. All right. And he's not facing the jab that Tio and Devin had, against George is good. He's solid, but he doesn't have the jab that Tio had in that fight. He doesn't have the jab that Devin Haney had in that fight, and these guys were landing some heavy, clean shots to the body. Devin Haney did a great job using that lead hand and that jab as a blinder to connect those right hands to the body continuously throughout the entire fight. I just don't see, I've not seen a fight where George was capable to be that consistent to give Lomachenko that many issues. I think in this fight here, George is going to have to really fight and go to war because from a technical standpoint, from a boxing IQ standpoint, he's inferior to me. And this is where he would have to be a little bit more physical, a little bit more rugged, sort of like he was in the Teofimo Lopez fight. He tried to be a little bit more aggressive in the Devin Haney rematch. And this might be a fight where he might apply some of the things he was doing by switching, just to throw Loma off a little bit. But for George to win this fight, he has to be busy. He's not a high volume puncher by any means. Again, he is a counter puncher. All right, but he has to be effective. He has to be consistent, and he has to fight. He has to be physical, and he has to attack the body whenever Loma is in his space. And again, it sounds easier said than done. The angles that Loma have, I think it's going to be too much. Loma's legs, being able to step around him, and I think it's going to just be too much for George Kambosos. I think George is tough. He's been durable. Again, he got dropped by Tio, but he never really seemed badly hurt. Dude is tough. He's a warrior. I think he's gonna go the 12 rounds. I think if there is a stoppage, we might get a very, very late stoppage by Loma, anywhere in between 9 to 12 rounds. So if you want to go for a stoppage, go there. But I could see George finishing the fight. Even being overwhelmed, I could see George finishing. And I think Lomachenko, not being the beast that he once was, Might get the stoppage, but I'm not expecting it this time around. You know. Another thing is too, Lomachenko seems to fall back on 12 rounds for some reason. 12 round against T.O. he lost. 12 round against Devin Haney he lost. I don't know. But I think Lomachenko is going to win. And I think it's going to be pretty clear. I just think he's too superior to George. And even at the older age, his style, what's his name? Alexander Usyk. These guys, the fight really begins in the second half. Even though they're mid-30s at this point. And they always tend to seem to outwork their opponents at that time. So I got Lomachenko winning. I'm leaning towards the decision. Should be a decent fight. I think Lomachenko and his pressure is going to make George have to work. But George is going to really have issues finding Loma. Because Loma is going to be off the line a lot. And George just doesn't have the legs and the jab to keep Lomachenko at distance for a long time. Lomachenko in this fight here is going to start faster than we've seen against Haney, against T.O., against some of his other opponents, even against Jermaine Ortiz. I forgot to bring that up, which was another very, very close fight against a guy that had phenomenal legs. These guys, Haney and Ortiz specifically, knew how to turn with Loma and pivot and follow him whenever he would step around them. And that gave him a huge advantage. George Kambosos couldn't follow Maxie Hughes. I spent a couple rounds just watching it recently for the first time. I didn't see it live. And I just spent a couple rounds just watching their feet. And it seems like George just had trouble dealing with Maxie. And I don't think he's going to just improve dramatically in one fight, at this point in his career. So I got Lomachenko. Again, be here later. I will be here to do live coverage of the fight. And please subscribe to the channel if you're new. Have a good day, good Saturday, and I'll see you later on this evening. Peace.